There we are. Webinar is being recorded. Very good. Continue.
All right, I think we're starting up with some attendees.
Ah, and there we are. We got 6 already.
Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna stop my video. Hi everyone, folks are gonna start trickling in, and we'll go from there.
Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Pasadena Privacy for All webinar regarding facial recognition. Our merry band of individuals got together and we found out the city was getting ready to spend millions of our dollars on a whole suite of different type of technologies. And so a group of concerned citizens, many of whom were lawyers and involved with the ACLU, got together. And so what we'd like to do this evening is give you a presentation on what facial recognition is, and we believe the threat that it poses to our privacy and to our own security by our own Mohammed Tasser, an ACLU lawyer and all around good guy. So with having said that, take it away, Mohammed, with one exception, please. If you have questions throughout the evening, please post them in the Q&A and we'll get to them in the question and answer period at the end of Mohammed's presentation.
Awesome. Thanks, Vinny. Hi, everyone. My name is Mohammed Tajsar. I'm a member of Pasadena Privacy for All. I'm a Pasadena resident. I also happen to be a lawyer at the ACLU and somebody who's been thinking about some of these questions for a little while now. So I wanted to welcome everybody tonight for this conversation. And so what I'm going to do real quick is share my screen and get the ball going. So let's do that. And there we go. All right. So welcome again. This is one of our first kind of public facing sort of webinar meeting that this Privacy for All group is hosting. So I'm super thrilled and stoked to kind of be here to create a space for a conversation that a lot of folks in the city think is really important. So I'll start with a brief sort of agenda, lay it out, and then talk about how we're going to proceed and ways we can actually have a conversation together, virtually, but nevertheless in conversation. So here we go. Here's what we're going to be doing today. So first, we're going to do a brief set of introductions and talk about kind of agreements for this evening. Then we're going to dive right into the substance, which is we're going to talk about face recognition. I see the poll just went up, and take a look at that poll and start filling it out. Then we're going to talk about Pasadena and how Pasadena uses face recognition. Then we're going to talk about why we think face recognition is a problem, and then what we can do about it. With that, we just launched a poll, and we'd love you all to take a second to fill it out. I see folks are already filling it out. We've got
24%.
Yeah, we've got a decent amount of folks that already have done it. So take a minute and answer those 4 quick questions, because they're going to be really relevant to our conversation. So yeah, very good. Results are trickling in, and we'll share the results when folks have finished their voting. And again, while we do that, I will go ahead with our introductions. I already introduced myself. This is my really quick bio. And then I'll start with a brief statement about what we're doing here and who we are. And so Vinny already mentioned kind of how we got together, but the Pasadena Privacy for All group, I'll introduce, I'll ask that the group kind of core members pop up and say hello at the end of the conversation, so folks know who put some faces to this group. But we basically formed in kind of informally in 2017 after kind of thinking about and seeing some of the different technologies that are being deployed here in the city of Pasadena. This group consists of a number of different individuals from a number of different organizations, including POP, that's Pasadena's Organizing for Progress, CCOP, that's the Coalition for Increased Civilian Oversight of the Pasadena Police, the ACLU SoCal, which I'm affiliated with, and other just individuals in the community who were really interested in this question. So that's kind of who we are. We'll introduce ourselves at the end of our conversation today. I'm going to end the poll now, and I will share the results momentarily. Before we get into it, just a couple quick what I consider to be ground rules or agreements. Hopefully that makes sense for everybody. So real quick, we will be recording this meeting, so I hope everyone's comfortable with that. We're doing that so that we can put it up on our website, which we're going to introduce in a little bit. Some other things that I'm planning on doing, for everybody, is first I want to make sure that this conversation is relevant to people present, and so I'm going to try as best as possible to talk about this issue in a way that I think actually makes sense for people in their like day-to-day lives. The other thing is I want to create a little bit of a space for us to kind of listen to each other. This is mostly for me, because in a conversation like this, I'm going to be doing a decent amount of talking, but I'd love to be able to reserve a decent chunk of time at the end of the conversation for folks to ask questions and to talk about or to raise some of the issues that or to talk about and raise issues that kind of are in folks' minds. And with that, part of the goal of what we're trying to do here is to create a kind of community, or at least use this meeting and other kind of webinars and events in the future to create a space for folks to talk about these issues. And so our hope is at the end of this conversation, you at least some of you all are agitated enough or interested enough to kind of join us to create a kind of bigger tent of folks who are interested in these questions. And with that, we're going to answer some questions and create some space. And lastly, my agreement for all of you, or at least my commitment to all of you, is I'm going to try to keep this conversation short. Well, I don't know, short-ish. We'll end it by 7:15, hopefully within the hour, because I know folks are busy and I want to respect everyone's time. So So there you go. Now, one of the things that we did beforehand in the registration is we asked people what you all are interested in talking about. And so I'm going to provide a quick summary of some of the things that came in on uh, that people who registered for this event wanted to hear a little bit about. Things like, how is Pasadena using face recognition? Does Pasadena Police Department have cameras everywhere? How accurate is face recognition for different groups of people? Any chance the cops are going to prohibit us from photographing them, which somebody asked about? Um, Other folks had raised other issues, like asking our group, what and how is Pasadena Privacy serving the Black community here in Pasadena, which I think is really important. We'll talk about. And then one individual raised kind of an interesting question of how do we understand surveillance versus kind of COVID-19 contact tracing, which has been kind of ongoing. And then lastly, what other technology does Pasadena use that we should know about? So those are some of the kind of issues that folks had flagged as being things that perhaps we can talk about today. And so I'm going to try to create some space to talk about some of those questions. And then before we begin, what I wanted to do is share the results here. So I'm going to share the results of our quick little poll. Seems interesting. We've got at least from the participants here who have responded. There's about there's 16 respondents, and looks like at least folks are divided on knowing that there was facial recognition being used in Pasadena. Fewer people knew that the Rose Bowl uses face recognition, which I think is interesting. And nobody seems to think that the the city informed people about face recognition. And I think the really interesting question, the number 4, is, do you think that there are any legitimate government uses of face recognition? It seems like nobody said yes, but if a number of people, probably about half of the participants, said it depends, and some folks were not sure. So that's interesting. I think that sets a tone for what we're about to do, and we'll dive right in. um, so, what the hell is face recognition? And so I'll talk about it really briefly, and then talk about what Pasadena is doing. So this is like a super technical definition of what facial recognition is. It's any equipment or software system designed to identify an individual from a digital image or a video frame of an individual's face, eyes, or irises. Hopefully that's relatively straightforward. It's not it's not clear immediately from this definition how it actually works in practice. So here's a quick demonstration. I grabbed this from someplace on the internet, which I think seems accurate enough. Look at these 4 images right here. This is basically how a face turns into data that can be used in a face recognition system. So if you see if you start with number 1, using some computer code, an image that you upload to a system, number 1, turns into something like number 4, and based on all the various dots and the relationships between those dots and number 4, you can have a pretty close to a digital ID of a person that the system will then be able to compare to other images and then determine whether there are matches. So that's kind of a crude way of explaining exactly what face recognition is. So then the question is, all right, well, why are we talking about face recognition right now at all? And I think there is a number of reasons why we're doing that today. The first 3 are kind of sort of technical, but the 4th is really practical. So the first reason is there's a lot of computing power today that we didn't have before, and that computing power allows us to go from here to here really quickly. And so that computing power has proliferated today, since as technology has improved. Number 2 is also important, which is storage costs of images have plummeted dramatically, right? So before, say 40 years ago, it used to cost literally hundreds of thousands of dollars to store a gigabyte of data. And today it costs like 2 or 3 cents. And so the ability to amass a bunch of information about people is basically free today. Number three is there are a lot of faces, right? So lots of people have faces. There are a lot of images around. There's digital photography is everywhere. So there's just a ton of faces. So if you marry number one, two, and three, you can see quickly why face recognition has really exploded in the last 10 years. And, number four, and most relevant for everybody, it's being used right here in Pasadena. And so let's talk about number four a little bit. Who uses it in Pasadena? You, I think, would not be surprised to know that the Pasadena Police Department uses face recognition. And we're going to talk about exactly how they do that. And I'm interested to hear from you all what you think about how they use it and what concerns you may have about its use. But it's not just Pasadena Police Department. It's also the Rose Bowl. Little did anybody know, the Rose Bowl actually has a pretty sophisticated way of using face recognition for everybody that attends the Rose Bowl for any kind of games or events. And so that's going to be really important. We'll talk about that. But not just the Rose Bowl and not just the Pasadena Police Department, but also lots of private businesses are starting to use it. And they're doing it in a number of different ways. This is one example. This is the website of a company called Pop ID, which offers a service wherein you can pay at like a local restaurant by showing up and putting your face up against the camera like that. And a number of Pasadena restaurants, this is pre-COVID, but they probably still post-COVID, are going to be using it. A number of restaurants in like Old Town and in and around Pasadena use this system as a way of giving a hands-free of paying hands-free for devices for food using only your face. So between the Rose Bowl, Pasadena Police Department, and lots of these businesses, there is a lot of face recognition going down in Pasadena. And so that kind of engendered some of the conversation that we're going to be having today. And so let's kind of dive right into it. I think to be a little bit more specific about exactly how Pasadena uses face recognition. And so we in the Privacy for All group have been kind of thinking about this question for a while and had concerns and thought, well, why don't we try to figure out if the city of Pasadena uses face recognition, because a bunch of other cities do. And the reality is that we at first did not know that the city was using face recognition at all. And we had assumed that it wasn't. And the reason we assumed it wasn't is because the actual police department had denied using it for quite a while. So let me give you an example of the ways that the police department had denied using it. I will show you a document that they provided actually to me. That's my name. And there's my address, my work address. We had submitted a request to the Pasadena Police Department asking for records about face recognition in case they were using it. And so this is what they responded. This is actually back in April 30th, if you can see from there. Oops. And they responded this way: the city of Pasadena does not use this technology. That was from April 2018. But little did we know, actually, at this time, and for more than a year, as of the date of this document, the city was in fact using it, and they were using it in they were using a couple different systems. One is they were using a system developed by the sheriff's department, or at least run by the sheriff's department, called LACRIS, that stands for the LA County Regional Identification System. And this is a screen grab from their website, which gives you precisely the gives you a sense from how they describe their services of how they actually use face recognition. Doesn't inspire a lot of confidence here, but that's the system. And how the system actually operates is it provides Pasadena Police Department and a bunch of other local police departments the ability to take a photograph, upload it to the system, and run it against approximately 8 million mugshots or arrest images that are stored within the system. And that enables Pasadena Police Department to determine whether individuals in the mugshot database are actually the individual on a particular photograph. That's the LACRA system, but that wasn't the only system Pasadena was using. They're also using this thing called vigilant face search. Again, I love the imagery here. Look at those people wearing suits and ties and looking at computers. Vigilant face search was another system that they were using for quite a while. They no longer use it, but they used it for quite a while, and in fact, were using it at the time that they told us they were not using it. Now, importantly for us, this system was developed by this company called Vigilant Solutions. Again, very authoritative sounding name. Vigilant Solutions turns out sells a whole bunch of surveillance technologies. Ooh, there's some kids in the background. Uses a whole bunch of technologies, or at least peddles a whole bunch of technologies. One of them is license plate reader technology, and something that Pasadena also uses. We'll talk more about that. But it's these guys, Vigilant, are ones that were busted early in 2018 as sharing license plate data with ICE. And so this is a screen grab from that document. And Pasadena was using Vigilant both for license plates, but also for its face recognition system. Now, all of this came without any announcement or without any policy. So that poll question that we asked you, like, did you know, like, were you informed that Pasadena was using this face recognition policy? That was a trick question. The answer was no, you weren't, because they didn't tell anybody. And in fact, they told us the opposite. Now, that practice is consistent with not just Pasadena, but a number of other departments locally. LAPD, in fact, used the same exact system and were busted for doing the same exact thing, which was denying using it. And then it turns out that they were in fact using it. This is from an LA Times article back in September, in which the LA Times found that LAPD had used face recognition 30,000 times without telling anybody that they were doing it. And in fact, telling people that they weren't doing it. So not great, not great. This is kind of the system that we currently have in Pasadena, at least that the police department is using. Now, note, they're not using cameras everywhere. So there isn't a network of CCTV cameras that we know of that's capturing people's movements and then running them against the face recognition database. What the police department is doing is collecting images through various sources and then running them against a mugshot database. That's what we know of. They could be doing other things, but that's at least what we know of. So that's Pasadena Police Department. How about the Rose Bowl? Again, few people knew about it, but here's what we found after we dug into it a little bit. This question first came up with Taylor Swift. I feel like Taylor Swift is the cause of and solution to all of life's problems. And so one of the causes and solutions that Taylor Swift has offered us involves face recognition. And so it came out more than almost 2 years ago now that Taylor Swift actually used face recognition software to detect stalkers at the Rose Bowl, whom her management team were concerned about, using various kiosks that they put up at the Rose Bowl. Now, that was a really limited targeted system. What we in the Privacy for All group found out was the system that the Rose Bowl used was far more extensive than that. Here's a document that we were able to dig up from the general manager of the Rose Bowl operating company, a public company actually, because the Rose Bowl is publicly owned. It's operated by an operating company that the city owns. This document shows, or at least demonstrates, that the Rose Bowl operating company was interested in purchasing or installing 416 monitors on 104 WTMDs. WTMDs are the metal detectors. So this is how they were planning on using it. They were going to provide these monitors at the metal detectors and run them against the facial recognition database, and to create basically blacklists of people who they were flagging as unwanted or otherwise creating potential problems at the Rose Bowl for all Rose Bowl events. I bet you didn't know that. And so this is from that document. All of this soon, not the details, but some of this became public. And the Rose Bowl got some heat for it. And the officials behind it actually defended the use of facial recognition, but they didn't say, "Hey, facial recognition is okay at at the Rose Bowl game because we need to make sure security controls are tight and in place." No, they actually said, "Look, we didn't do this for for security purposes. This was specific for marketing and sponsorship engagement." So their answer was, look, we didn't do this because we wanted to prevent, who knows, like terrorism or something. We did it because we wanted to make money off of it. Come on. That was their response. And I don't know about you, but whichever way it cuts seems to me particularly troubling. So you might ask, well, Mohammed, what the hell's your problem with facial recognition? And I'll run through it briefly because I think it merits it merits some discussion, and I'm interested in y'all's thoughts on this as well, and we could talk about it. Here, I think it's twofold for us. The first is face recognition is biased. In that, by biased, I mean it's racist and it's sexist, and it's also deeply invasive. So those are the kind of twin reasons why it is a problem here in Pasadena. So, okay, well, you might ask, well, what do you mean by biased? And I can tell you what I mean by biased. I mean it in three, or at least in three different nodes. Um, if you think of the facial recognition system, you can divide it up into three groups, or at least three parts, right? The first is the image that you want to that a person is in that you want to identify. The second is the database of photos of people who you know. And then the third is the algorithm that compares the image to the database, right? At each of these three stages, there is racism and there's sexism. All right. So let's start with the algorithm, that is the computer at the end of the process, right? What we know from research is that facial recognition systems perform worse on Black, brown, and female faces, right? There's a lot of literature on this question, from a number of different sources. A primary one is a researcher and activist named Joy Buolamwini, who was at MIT and who really pioneered some of this research and found that a systematic gender and skin type bias in face recognition in general and artificial intelligence systems, face recognition in particular and AI systems in general. And it's not just researchers and scholars, it's also the federal government itself, right? So this is from a study, a news report about a federal government study commissioned that was published approximately a year ago that confirms latent racial bias of a whole bunch of facial recognition systems. This is the study itself from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And that study looked at a ton of different commercial vendors, including the ones that Pasadena Police Department uses, both the Vigilant one and Lacris, and found a whole bunch of latent demographic kind of inequity and bias in these systems. All right, so that's the algorithm. But how about the databases of the images, right? So what I mean by the databases here is, let's say you have an image of me and you want to identify me, you're going to run that image up against the whole database of mugshots that you currently have, right? That's what Pasadena uses. So what Pasadena does is it runs these databases against mugshots. So what's the problem with that? Well, it should be clear, I think, for some of you all that have understood or at least been thinking about racism in the last few months, that a database of mugshots is going to be profoundly racist. And the reason is why, because the police departments, regardless of where you're at, whether you're in Pasadena or anywhere else, are more likely to stop and arrest people of color than they are to stop and arrest white people, right? There are a whole bunch of studies that talk about this. I've copied two just for an example. Here's a here's a quick little one that talks about a big study published in May of 2020 about a whole bunch of traffic stops that describes how, interestingly enough, the darker your skin, the more likely you will be pulled over, and that darkness was impacted in not just was impacted by the time of day, so that at nighttime you're more likely to be perceived as dark, and therefore you're more likely to be stopped. Right? That's just one example. There are a whole bunch of them. Here's another example that I pulled up. The reality is that there is, as this article headline says, there's overwhelming evidence that the criminal justice system is racist, and that is uh, that's sort of kind of a given. And I think um, denying that this system is racist and the system that creates the mugshot databases is racist is sort of like denying global warming. You can do it, but you're not going to sound very smart. Um, and lastly, the image itself is also racist. So the image of me, say that the government, that the Pasadena Police Department wants to run face recognition on, is also racist. And I'll give you one example of why that's true. This is an image of a man named Robert Williams. He is a resident of the Detroit area, and he was back in 2019 arrested um, by the Michigan State Police Department and the Detroit the Detroit Police Department, using some kind of Michigan state tools, based on a match between his face and some other sort of document. What happened is that he was one day was outside in his patio, and police officers pulled up and arrested him and accused him of committing a robbery in an upscale, I think it was a jeweler. And he was detained for a little less than a day, falsely. And it turned out that he was not, in fact, who the police department thought he was, and and he ended up being arrested. And so the little wonder, I think, that he ended up being arrested because he is a big, large black man, and he was falsely identified through a facial recognition system with an individual who Detroit had thought committed a robbery. And why is that kind of a problem? I think the problem here is that when humans use face recognition systems, it makes it appear, to humans anyway, that the systems are more objective than they actually are, right? So when we're using a computer system to conduct an algorithmic match between one face and a database, we're more likely to think that the results of that matching is objective because a computer did it. And there's a lot of studies that actually demonstrate that this is true. It shows that even in situations where a facial recognition match is used to generate a lead that can then be used to investigate crime, which is how Pasadena uses the system, that process is likely to create bias. So all of that together makes the whole system racist and sexist. So recall I had also talked a little bit about how the problem wasn't just that the systems are racist and sexist, but also that face recognition itself is uniquely invasive. And so what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that all of these three parts that we talked about, those capture images and do things to the images all without anybody's consent, without you knowing that you're in the database of photos, without you knowing what the algorithm is, without you even knowing that there's going to be an image of you that's going to be run up against those databases if the cops are interested in it, right? The reality is, even if all of those biases didn't exist, even if the systems were perfectly capable of identifying you, we'd still have a real problem with it, because this kind of technology, because of how powerful it is really likely to invade, to create a whole, basically it's going to make the exercise of your freedoms in a private way with complete dignity and integrity really difficult, if not impossible, right? I mean, just to give you an example, here is a screen grab from a New York Times article that shows dots on a map of people who had cell phones on them from a database of cell phone locations. through this New York Times research, they were able to get a whole database of cell phone locations, and using not super sophisticated analysis, we're actually able to pinpoint individuals um, and identify them based on these dots and their whereabouts. In fact, using this system, they were able to identify members of Donald Trump's Secret Service team at Mar-a-Lago. Um, all that to say, if the system is perfectly accurate, it's likely to create some really horrifying results, which is that you depending on how broad the sort of how broadly used the surveillance technology is, are likely to be identifiable pretty quickly to the Pasadena Police Department or the Rose Bowl operating company. And the reality is, it seems to me that there really isn't any kind of limited use of the technology, that once you start using it, it's going to be really easy to continue to use it if you're the Pasadena Police Department and any other local police department in ways that I don't think we quite comprehend the problems with. So that's kind of the pitch. And that's what some of us sort of have been thinking about. And so you might ask, all right, well, given all this, what does the police department actually say about all this stuff? Like, what's their defense, right? What are they telling us now that it's all public? Well, they say a number of things. The first thing they say is, well, this is not really surveillance, right? It's limited. We don't go around like taking videos of people and then identifying them based on our system. And so you can't really call it surveillance. It's something else. To me, I'm not really super, I'm interested actually in hearing what you all think about this, but I'm not super convinced by that. I don't really care if they call it surveillance or if they call it investigations or, popcorn or merry-go-rounds. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that Pasadena Police Department is using a technology that is deeply invasive, that we know is racist, that we know is sexist, and they're doing it without really telling anybody. They're using it in ways that may create a lot of problems, particularly for areas in our city that are really heavily policed. So that's really the issue. Here's the other thing they say. Okay, well, look, we're using it, but face recognition matches aren't the sole basis for an investigation. That is, if we get a match that you are, Mohammed Tajsar, we need some other information, not just a match, to be able to take some action against you, arrest you, or do something else. That's what they say. The reality is that's what everybody says, and that's not a really high bar. Mr. Williams that I talked about earlier in Detroit, this Detroit Police Department had the same exact policy, and they nevertheless arrested him because of a facial recognition mismatch. It's not very hard for cops to generate another tip or another point of interest in you other than a facial recognition match. To me, simply saying that it's not only face recognition is not a real meaningful limitation on what the cops can do with that information. Here's what else they say. They say, well, look. All right, maybe be that as it may, there could be inaccuracies, but humans double check, right? Humans double check what facial recognition systems do, so it's going to be good. Are you convinced by that? I'm not super convinced by that. I mean, imagine I said the following. Imagine I said to you that, our friend Vincent DiStefano, one of our colleagues, imagine everybody knew Vinny as a Pasadena police officer who's an incredible racist. He's just an absolutely awful guy, and everybody knows that. And he goes around harassing everybody. Now imagine we came to the police department and said, hey, Vinny's a racist. Why is he on the beat? And the police department responds and says, yes, look, we know he's a racist, but don't worry. We've given him a really stand-up partner, and his partner is a wonderful guy, and his partner will be there to double check Vinny's work. So anytime Vinny does something terrible, his partner is going to be there, and his partner is going to make sure that Vinny doesn't do anything terrible. Does that give you confidence? It doesn't give me very much confidence. The answer to having a racist cop on the beat is not to pair him with a really righteous cop. It's to fire the racist, right? Same thing with facial recognition. If you've got inaccuracies, sure, humans can double check, but why not get rid of the inaccuracies, right? That's what we're talking about when we're talking about this. The other answer is to, they tell us, and I'm sure you probably have heard about this, well, facial recognition will help us solve crime. I don't know. Has it? It's not clear. I've looked. Lots of people have looked. And in fact, the reality is that all of these surveillance technologies, it's for many of them anyway, it's not clear at all that they solve crime, or at least that they contribute to public safety in general. I mean, even putting aside questions about what public safety even is, which is a broader conversation that maybe we can have in a little bit, there really is no empirical research that says that facial recognition solves crime or facial recognition creates better public safety outcomes, right? There's nothing empirical about that. Nobody's actually ever done an analysis and found that that's true. They just sort of say it, and they can, give us examples like, oh, when we used this technology, such and such person was arrested and such person was a bad guy. But that doesn't tell us, like, statistically, whether we're better off with facial recognition versus with traditional methods of policing, whatever those might be. So the reality is there just isn't any empirical science behind this stuff. It's just assertion. They just tell us that it's true, but they haven't really actually proven it. They also say things like, well, they say a bunch of other things, and we can get into it, but suffice it to say that there's not really much here that kind of gives us much confidence. They also say that we have policies to prevent abuse. Here's one of those policies. The reality is they didn't actually have this policy. So they used facial recognition for more than 2 years without any kind of policy. When it became known, they scrambled, created a policy, and it's not really clear that the policy does really much of anything. They might tell us we're not racist, and fine. You might not be racist, I think, is a response, but everybody knows that the criminal justice system is racist. See earlier slide. So whether or not individual cops are racist, I think, is beside the point. The question is whether the technology is racist and whether the institution creates racist outcomes. And I think the answer to both parts is yes. All right. So that's kind of the presentation. So if you say you're convinced by all that, so what do we do now? And this is the part that I think I'm sort of interested in hearing what folks think about this. You can tell us some of your thoughts in the chat, maybe raise some issues in the Q&A. For us at the Privacy for All group, we're interested in what a lot of other cities are starting to do with facial recognition, which is to ban it or to press pause on it. So if you're interested, look at all these different cities. On the left side is a bunch in California. On the right side are all those first 6 are cities in Massachusetts. Both of the Portlands in Oregon and in Maine. Maybe there's another Portland I'm not aware of, but both of them ban face recognition. All of these cities ban in face recognition in every form within their cities. And so the question for us maybe is, should we ban it in Pasadena? And that's a question that we've been trying to ask in our group, and is a question that actually we'd love to get your feedback, your participation, and your thoughts on, and to see if we can get something like that going in the city of Pasadena. And then there's the question of all this other technology that the Pasadena uses. And, we don't have too much time to get into it here, but we already talked about some of them. License plate readers. Pasadena uses vigilant license plate readers. And it's deeply problematic for a number of reasons. Pasadena also used other technologies, right? One of them was a short-lived experiment with using a people finder named Spokio, where the Pasadena Police Department had access to troves and troves of information about every single person just simply by typing in the name. The police department used that. There's other forms of other technologies that the Pasadena Police Department has. They have a fleet of helicopters that have been equipped with pretty sophisticated cameras. This is from a story back in April. So about a month into the pandemic, the police department successfully got the city to pay up more than $400,000 for newfangled cameras on their helicopters that often circle around, at least in my neighborhood and other neighborhoods in kind of north and northwest Pasadena. So they've got that, and they've in the past contemplated actual cameras in public spaces as well. That's a lot of stuff. And that's kind of the reason why we're having these conversations today, because we're interested in sort of what we as residents, community members, kind of passersby even are how we might all be affected by the use of these technologies. And certainly with respect to face recognition, we think it's a real problem, and we're interested in hearing from more and more folks, and kind of to get a sense from other people in other spaces what you all think about this technology, and how we might be able to work together to resolve some of the tensions that I've kind of laid out. And so so with that, what I might do is make a pitch for us before we get into the Q&A and the conversation, to join us, because we're interested in having uh, kind of a bigger tent, as it were, of people who are interested in these questions. And so you could visit us at our website. Again, we're made up of a whole bunch of different people that some of whom are actually on the our participants today. I'm going to I'm actually going to stop.
Hey, Mohammed, before we do that,
Yeah,
we do have a couple of questions that I think could be addressed.
sure.
The first comes from Pixie Boyden. Do we know the deployment of the cameras for use throughout the city? What and where is the concentration? And I have another one after that. I think you just muted yourself.
I sure did. Sorry. Um, uh, Here's what we know about cameras in the city. So, as far as we can tell, there aren't kind of a network of CCTV or kind of fixed cameras in the city operated by the city. There have been proposals in the past to put up cameras at like parks and stuff. And in fact, we might see that proposal circling back up again, because there's been a couple of recent incidents at public parks that the police departments and maybe local leaders might are thinking about responding to, and potentially they might raise the question of cameras. So there isn't a huge network of like fixed cameras in the city. There are license plate reader cameras. Those are on cars. So those cameras go around snapping pictures of cars and potentially other people. But that's kind of what happens in the city. So we haven't seen widespread deployment of.
If I may,
Yeah.
no, they also have access to the cameras that are part of businesses, cameras that are part of ring systems. All the police department has to do is come into contact with a photo, and then they get that photo and they compare it against their mugshot database. And so even though the city of Pasadena doesn't have, George Orwell cameras supplied all over the city, they're already there and they have access to that data.
Yeah,
Now,
totally.
we have one other question as well, and this comes from one of my favorite people, anonymous attendee. What are the current laws that govern the use of this technology? Are there any privacy constraints?
Yeah, good question, anonymous attendee. Excellent thought. The reality is that it's kind of the Wild West, actually, when it comes to face recognition. There's really one law that currently exists, and that exists in the state of California, and that bans the use of facial recognition on images captured by body cams. Okay, so Pasadena Police Department uses body cams, and they have, like, they're here. They are in theory supposed to turn them on, and it captures video. That video face recognition cannot be run on that video. That's a state law. That's the only real limitation. Everything else is fair game when it comes to the law, and that's why it's communities across the country have been kind of banding together to sort of take the matter up in their own hands and to force local city leaders to enact some of these bans, because we're not getting a lot of regulation on this technology from the state, and God forbid from the federal government. So that's kind of what we got going on. I see that there are a couple of Joe Roos had asked a couple questions in the chat as well. Joe asked, how does the Rose Bowl make money from face recognition? I don't know, actually. It's one of the questions that I'd be super interested in asking them about. That marketing stuff that they were doing, we don't have a lot of clear information about that. I'm sure we could ask, and potentially other folks, if people are interested in inquiring, we certainly would be willing to connect and figure out ways that we can find out from the Rose Bowl operating company what are the kind of marketing arrangements that they entered into that require the use of face recognition.
Mo, I did answer that question in the chat. And the notion is that they take the data they collect, much the same way that Facebook or Twitter or any other entity, mostly free entities, do. And you find out the reason they're free is you're the data that they then peddle to a variety of sources. And the most important thing is when they collect that data, which they then turn and monetize, they're not asking you for permission for that unless it is an opt-out system, which you really can't opt out at a metal detector.
Yeah, I think that's in general what we assume, right, Vinny? But we don't have like the specifics on exactly what's going on. So, th- yeah, that's our assumption, but we need to kind of dig into it. And the reality is, none of this stuff is, the city is not really forthcoming with a lot of this stuff. So it requires like a lot of detective work from sort of like people in the community, like you and I, Joe, to try to figure that out. Joe had also asked kind of what has actually already been done in Pasadena and how willing is the city council to ban it. It's we've Some people within the group and other people actually within the kind of local activist organizations have raised the question of facial recognition in a number of different contexts. We have done it in the Pasadena Privacy for All group has done it in certain contexts. There was a whole group of organizations and civil rights groups and civil society organizations that kind of banded together to create a Bill of Rights, a kind of a set of demands after the murder of George Floyd to the police department that included a demand about stopping the use of really invasive surveillance technology. And there didn't seem to be a huge amount of appetite for it from city council, but we also are kind of early stages in this process. So part of what we're hoping to do is to kind of start to go and ask people around the city, and indeed people like within the various communities, what they think about this question, to see if this is something that we ought to kind of raise more forcefully with city council and to talk about that. So yeah, Joe, I'm interested. If you're interested in kind of sharing your responses to any of this, certainly can let us know in the chat, and we could allow you to chime in here by voice if you're interested. No pressure.
Mohammed, there are a couple of other questions here. Pixie Boyden has another question. I think that's ideal. It says, are they utilizing camera feeds happening now through the city's transportation department? For example, the camera that is on Garfield and Washington and the like. And of course, that would be also in the Gold Line or any of the other rapid transit systems. And there's another question from David I'll get to, David Chavez, an excellent question from David. Why am I not surprised once you've answered that?
Totally. Thank you, Pixie, as well. That's a great question. And I don't know that we have the answer to that. Well, we know what they've told us. They've told us that they're not doing that, right? They're told us the only thing they're doing is this like limited mugshot thing, right? But we don't know what they're doing with like the traffic enforcement cameras or potentially other cameras. And I feel like that's a problem, and I can't give you any good answers. I can't be like, yo, Pixie, they're not doing this. Like that camera that's on the corner of like, I think that on like Fair Oaks and like Woodbury and stuff, like we don't know. And the problem is it's really easy for them to use it, right? This technology is widely available. It's pretty cheap. And for the most part, often all it takes is our clicks of a button and like paying a few bucks to like a third-party service to start using it, right? So without real like demands on the city, without clear limitations, one day we just might find out, oh, they're using the traffic cameras to perform facial recognition analysis, and they wouldn't tell us because that's been their MO. So that's really the problem. I'm curious what you think about that.
Now, David Chavez has, as the presentation stated, the criminal justice system is foundationally racist, and as others have rightly shown, is anti-Black. How do you see the surveillance tech and increasing policing in Northwest Pasadena as connected to gentrification, the displacement of Black, brown, and low-income residents?
Yeah, I think, well, here's what I think a lot of things about that question. I'm sure other folks on this call or on this talk probably do. And so we can definitely, we would love to hear folks chime in on this. David, you as well. I mean, my general thought is that this technology, putting aside the Rose Bowl question for a moment, like it is all part of a piece, right? It is all part of a piece of how the police departments kind of use their power to protect certain interests at the expense of other interests. And so I think the issue that you're raising, David, the issue of gentrification, displacement of low-income people, kind of using the kind of apparatus of the state to privilege groups with money, groups with power at the expense of certain other groups that have historically lived in particular places, that's part of the police department's MO. And I think the surveillance technologies are a critical way that police departments perform those functions. And I think that that's kind of that's the 30,000 foot picture for me anyway, and for a lot of us, for why we're kind of concerned about all of these things, right? So we can pick apart like face recognition here or license plate readers here, but we also have to keep in mind that a lot of the way that some of our historically over-policed neighbors have faced the blunt of the police department here in the city of Pasadena is in pursuit of ends that don't really have anything to do with their safety, but have to do with other things. That's kind of my analysis. I'm curious, actually, if you're interested. I'm curious what people think. Drop a message in the chat if you we could allow you to participants to kind of opine about that. So if you want to respond to that, just let us know. We can give you like kind of speaking privileges. But that's kind of my thought. I don't know, Vinny, if what you think about
that. I wouldn't put anything past them.
Right.
I had just mentioned Pixie had asked a question again about where they're using the cameras. And we really don't know. And I'd like to go back to a meeting that Chris Ockerhauser and I were at, a public safety meeting in 2018, where I directly asked Chief Perez, nice guy. I asked him, are you using facial recognition? And without missing a beat, he said, no, we are not. Steve Mermel, the city manager, quietly walked over to him, whispered in his ear, and he said, well, let me rephrase that. And it turns out they had been using it. They'd been using it for over a year and a half. Now, he wasn't lying, because the Pasadena police did not have a facial recognition system. But as you pointed out, Mo, they were using the one from the sheriff's department. But nonetheless, they've been using it. Again, I want to repeat, without any policy in place whatsoever. And it was only when our group got together with the mayor, ex-mayor Tornick, the chief of police, and the city manager, that we asked them directly. They said, well, we're working on it right now. And it was something they really cobbled together at the last minute.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's part of our kind of problem here with this whole system. So we're at about 7 p.m. So to keep folks in here on top, to let folks go, I think what I might do is sort of wrap up here. And say that, this is kind of part of a bigger, face recognition is kind of an immediate concern that we would love as this sort of organizing group to be able to have more folks sort of chime in on, think about, and kind of join us in sort of dealing with. And so that's kind of what I was trying to, let's see, hoping to do here. And I think the easiest way for folks to kind of connect with us is to email us. And so at this email address that we're going to start checking, pasadenaprivacy@gmail.com, let us know if you're interested in kind of joining this conversation and thinking about some of these questions. We'd love to have your input and your thoughts. We're a group that I'm going to ask a few of the folks on the kind of organizing committee to share the screens momentarily, so you know who's behind the group. But basically, we're always looking for additional ideas, thoughts, and participation. And so the easiest way to do that is for you to kind of hit us up, and we meet weekly, and we'd love to have you participate and figure out how to kind of join this conversation. So that's the best way to connect with us. And what I'm going to do now is,
Mo, while you're doing that, Brian Berry brought up a good point. Mention our letter that we're putting together to get people to sign. Thank you, Brian Berry, for that.
Certainly. So one of the projects that we're currently working on is a project involving license plate readers and a recent development that we found, which is that currently the Pasadena Police Department appears to actually be collecting, they've been doing this for a long time, which is collecting license plate information about cars all throughout the city. And we have recently found out that despite assurances that they wouldn't do this, that they're actually sharing that information with a whole bunch of different agencies, including with federal immigration authorities, in ways that really jeopardize the safety and security of some of our undocumented friends and neighbors within the community. So we're hoping to, we're on it. So we're hoping to kind of connect with individuals and groups across the city to try to raise a stink about this, actually, because it's a development that I think is profoundly sort of shocking. And so if you're interested in working on that question, also feel free to connect with us at pasadenaprivacy@gmail.com and look out for more from us on that question. And also on the website, pasadenaprivacy.org, there's a volunteer and mailing list where you can keep up to date with our news from us. So with that, what I'm going to actually do now is if folks are interested, I'm going to, as we let folks go, what I will do is promote some of the people that are on our kind of steering committee to panelists. And if they're interested, they could share their screens so that everybody here can see who is part of this ragtag group of people. So
how do I share my screen?
So share your screen as we head out.
How?
But this is these are some of the folks that are involved in this process. If you
How?
want to,
He's going to do it for you.
Yeah, if you want to
Marla.
join us,
There you are.
There I is.
Everyone wave. These are some of the folks that meet regularly. If you want to join us, feel free to connect with us and to join our ragtag bunch of people as we
Is that the royal wave, Ed?
To work on this question. So with that, thank you everyone for being a part of this conversation, and thank you to all the organizers here and everybody else.
Thank you for the participants.
Yeah, and
thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks.
Great job. Good
Join
job.
us. Be one of us. Be one of us.
Right,
yeah, we're fun.
I'll mute myself, but thanks everyone. Well, we'll end it. So thanks everyone. Email us and we'll go from there.
Good night, everyone.